Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Courtside View webcast. This is sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune basketball beat writer Steve Walentik. Steve, we just got back from Kansas. Missouri loses there 103 to 86, as I recall. That puts Missouri 18-6 overall, 4-5 in the Big 12 Conference, which is, I think, worse than any of us would have projected at this point. First of all, let's look a little bit at the KU game, the KU series maybe. Now, Mike Anderson, for all the great things he's done at Missouri, 1-8 against Kansas, and just, I guess, judging from last night's game, does not appear to be making up a ton of ground on the Jayhawks. Just your thoughts on where that series stands now as far as the competitiveness of it?
Well, it's clearly not competitive right now. Whether or not that can change anytime soon, maybe if both Morris twins turn pro, which actually probably will happen, and Josh Selby leaves and Ben McLemore somehow decides to come to Missouri and not Kansas, and then you've also got Kansas losing a couple important role players like Brady Morningstar and Tyrell Reed. Maybe that gap narrows, but as we saw last night, Kansas has guys on its bench that are just as good as a lot of the guys that Missouri has starting. You look at a guy like Travis Relaford, who's played sparingly this year, has had an injury lately that has limited him, but he comes off the bench last night and scores 10 points. He was a guy that Missouri really wanted coming out of high school, and obviously has not had a huge role in Lawrence, but would have had a bigger role had he come to Columbia for sure. A guy like Thomas Robinson had 9 points and 7 rebounds in 15 minutes last night, completely outplayed Missouri's two backup forwards. He's a guy who we've talked about this. We think would have a chance to be Missouri's best forward if he were here, and that's the sort of talent discrepancy that you find throughout these two teams, and really have seen the last few years, and that's one of the reasons it's been so lopsided.
Yeah, I guess my take on it is that, you know, I guess it kind of what is your expectations for Missouri basketball? I think mine going into the season was that Missouri had a chance to be kind of a dark horse contender for the Big 12, and they clearly are not. And half of that is that Kansas is a lot better than people were giving them credit for, I think. When people were saying Kansas State might win the league, you know, I think people were kind of sometimes you get used to one team winning it and you're kind of eager to pick the team that might change all that, but I don't think much has changed. You know, as Texas obviously still is in first place, but Kansas just never does come back to the pack. I mean, that's a statement about Bill Self's consistency, because when you look around the country, nobody, not Duke, not Kentucky, not anybody, doesn't ever have a bad year, but Kansas doesn't.
Well, and you look at it, you look at a team like last year's Kansas team, they lose Sharon Collins, they lose Cole Aldrich, they lose Xavier Henry. These are three important pieces that they have, and you think, well, they're clearly going to have to take a hit, but you forget all the guys who are waiting in the wings, and Marcus Morris played a lot last year and was really good in the Big 12 season. He's taken his game to another level. Markieff Morris has come off the bench. They haven't missed a beat. In fact, I think they're better offensively with the two of them than with Aldrich, because I think Markieff can do more things. He's a better perimeter shooter, moves the ball better, more athletic, all those things. They've taken a hit defensively, but that's the sort of thing that happens in Lawrence, is they have talent throughout that roster. Even if they do lose the Morris twins and Selby and all those other guys, there's no reason to think that Bill Self isn't going to reload, because he's been reloading since he's got there.
One of the bright spots for Missouri last night and maybe over the last few weeks has been Phil Pressey. They moved him, or Mike Anderson moved him into the starting lineup. He's actually kind of playing more than Mike Dixon now, and it wasn't really, I guess you couldn't really say Dixon has done anything to merit not playing as much. I mean, he's had a good year, I think, but Pressey has kind of been a spark for this team. Last night, he was probably the best player for Missouri, with the possible exception of Lawrence Bowers. Just your thoughts on this new lineup they've gone to, new starting lineup with Matt Pressey, Phil Pressey, Ricardo Ratliff, Lawrence Bowers, and Marcus Denman. Do you think it's a good move, and you think it's sparked them at all?
I do. I'll get to Phil in a second, but just starting out with the overall change, I think having a smaller role for Justin Safford has been a good thing, because he's struggled this year, and he's hurt them. Not only has he not been that productive, but I think there have been times where he's hurt them with his shot selection, losing the ball, being too aggressive, driving to the basket. He's not rebounding. He played 13 minutes last night and didn't get a single rebound. I think they need to have Lawrence Bowers on the floor more, and if starting is the way to make sure that happens, obviously part of him not playing as much the last couple of games was his injury. But if starting makes him a bigger piece of this team, I think that's a good thing. I think Anderson has obviously tried to do something to help spark Kim English. He's a guy who I didn't personally think was as good as people were expecting him to be coming into this year, but I also didn't think he would struggle as much as he has. Coming off the bench seemed to help him the other night. He scored a season-high 21 points, looked more relaxed, more comfortable
against
Colorado. Obviously didn't carry that over into Allen Fieldhouse. He finished with 6 points, was 1 of 5 from the field, or 1 of 6 from the field, I think, and had 2 costly turnovers in the first half as Kansas kind of went on a little run to pull ahead initially. But as a whole, I think that's a good idea to do something to get Kim English going, because they are going to need more from him down the stretch. As far as Pressey specifically, I was a little surprised when we started to see the change where Dixon was playing less and Pressey more, but it's really been hard to argue it with the way that he's been playing. Right now, over his last 7 games, he's averaging 11 points, 4.5 assists, shooting 48% from the field. He's stealing the ball. I still think that, and he's also taking some big shots. He did last night. I still think he's limited defensively, and that's hurt them a little bit, where he's gotten beat off the dribble. But
he'll get steals, but yeah, he gets beat a lot. I think he gets beat a lot more and gives up a lot more than he's getting back in steals.
But he is a guy that can spark them offensively. His quickness gives opposing teams problems, and so more minutes for him is good. I think he still has a ways to go to be as good a player as he can be.
I think they're in a situation, too, where 2 of their 5 best players are both point guards. And against some teams, you can play Dixon and Pressey at the same time. You saw it against Colorado, where they were pretty effective together. They caused a lot of havoc. I'm not sure Kansas was one of those teams where they were going to have a lot of luck doing that, because they were just getting overwhelmed size-wise and getting killed in the rebounding, because they need their guards to rebound, because they don't have big men who are good at rebounding.
It's not just that Missouri's guards, or those 2 guys are point guards, is that they're small point guards.
Yeah.
Phil is obviously giving up a lot of size, generously listed at 5'10".
Well, we talked about Missouri not closing the gap on Kansas and kind of examined the Kansas end of this. The Missouri end of it, I mean, 4-5 at this point. Going into this season, I thought Missouri was a team that could win maybe half its Big 12 road games, maybe be an 11-5 type team, which I guess still is mathematically possible, but seems completely remote. A disappointing season to you? I mean, are we on track for what you would call a disappointment?
I think so far, yeah. I mean, you have to look at it that way right now. I think
the coaches picked them 5th. In the league, which we thought was low, but maybe they were right.
I mean, they certainly could still finish 5th, but you look at it, they had a 14-1 non-conference season. That looked impressive. It's looking less so all the time, because Illinois doesn't seem as good. Even Vanderbilt and Old Dominion haven't quite been as good as maybe people thought. But really, you're judging this on Big 12 play, and they're not a team that's contending for a conference title, which I and a lot of other people thought they would do. They're not a team that's on the verge of the top 10, or just outside the top 10 nationally. They could be slipping out of the polls as we speak. They're down to 19 now. I would imagine they'll find a way to win at home against Oklahoma, but they don't have a lot of margin for error the rest of the way to be a team that's in the top 4 of the Big 12.
And the culprit, I think, has been defense. I think anybody could say that. Anybody could see that. Last night they shoot 52% in the game, and they still get blown out. Just your thoughts on, is this a correctable problem? Is this just who they are at this point? I mean, this deep in the season, they are just not a good defensive team.
I think it's a correctable problem in the sense that all problems are probably somehow correctable, but we're not seeing a lot of reason to think that anything's going to change. They've been a terrible rebounding team, not just this year, but for several years. That's not going to change. And what happens is Missouri ends up giving up a lot of second chance opportunities, where they either give up baskets around the basket, which hurts you, or you end up having to commit fouls, which happened against the Jayhawks, and that hurts you too, because then your best players are coming off the floor. I think they don't have a lot of guys who will just go guard somebody the way that a J.T. Tiller or Zaire Taylor or Keith Ramsey would, where that was their sole focus. I think Phil Pressey's a guy who likes to go steal the ball. I think Marcus Denman is good at playing passing lanes. I think Lawrence Bowers is good at, rotating over from the weak side and blocking shots. But in terms of just locking up the guy that they're responsible for, I don't think they have anybody who's really good at that. And
I think that's a good point. And I think also, as much as Mike Anderson says, this defense, it isn't all about getting steals. It kind of is, because if they're not getting steals, they can't play defense for 35 seconds and keep people from scoring. So if they're not getting steals, they're giving up a ton of second chance points and easy baskets inside. They're not strong enough to stop a decent team inside.
I think last year's team could get away with not stealing the ball all the time because they did have guys who could get stops, forcing you into tough shots, or they still had some of the same weaknesses. They were undersized and they weren't great at rebounding, but they would make it difficult on you to score even if they weren't stealing the ball. You had to work for it, and I don't think that's happened with anybody that Missouri's played, especially away from home. They're not making it hard on anybody to score. People are getting to the rim way too easily. We saw, we talked about this last week, Doge Balbay looked like Allen Iverson driving around Phil Pressey. I thought last Wednesday against Oklahoma State, Keaton Page was able to get to the rim. This is not a guy who is going to be mistaken for, Chris Paul anytime soon. Good. But those guys are all having success against this team defensively, and I think it's because individually they don't have guys who just lock down anybody.
Now, they are heading into a 4-game stretch now where they're going to be favored in each game. So they got a chance, in 2 weeks we might be sitting here and talking about this in a little different vein. But at this point, do you think there's any danger of them slipping to the point where they're not going to make the tournament?
Right now, no. But that can change in a hurry if they lose a home game. Obviously, that's the one thing that this team has been able to do is.
So you think 8-8 will get them in?
I think definitely 8-8 gets them in. So that means either winning out at home or winning at Iowa State probably is your easiest of the remaining 3 road games to be assured of 8-8. You start losing 1 or 2 home games. You still have Baylor left. You still have Kansas left at home. I think then it gets iffy. There isn't a lot of margin for error. I would assume that Missouri finds a way to handle Oklahoma and Texas Tech these next 2 home games. I think they do have a good shot to win in Ames. Obviously, they beat Iowa State by 33 points here in Columbia, but if they stumble in any of those games or if they lose against Baylor, I think then you have to start at least being a little bit concerned that a tournament bid could slip away.
And you vote in the top 25, and you've kind of mentioned a million times, it's hard to find teams in the top 25, much less 68. So I think that works in their favor. This is not a great year for college basketball. You've got a few dominating teams and just kind of a whole lot of rabble. And I think you've seen it with Missouri. No matter they keep going 1-1 every week, and they slip down a little bit. It's like the mafia. Once you're in, you never get out. I mean, they may still be in the top 25 next week if they beat Oklahoma. So I think they're a tournament team, unless, like you said, they somehow slip down to 7-9 in the conference, and then they might have some problems. Well, thanks for joining us this week. Next week we'll be back to talk about Missouri's game against Oklahoma.